Hello, listeners. I'm Judy Johnson, the current president of the Collaborative Law Institute of Minnesota for 2024. And I am here with two people today who probably know more about collaborative team divorce than anybody on the planet. And so I'm really excited that they agreed to come and talk with us today. It's Ron Ousky on my left, an attorney who has actually been the president also of the International Organization of Collaborative Practice. Chad Olson on my right, who maybe has done more financial analysis in collaborative team divorce cases than anybody else on the planet. So these are people who know a lot and are here to kind of explain to you what the process is like. How is it different, from any other kind of process in family law? And what advice would they have to give you as people who are considering reaching out to us? So greetings. Thank you for coming. I'm very grateful.
Well, thanks for having us, Judy.
It's not easy to do, just to show up and talk on film, so I appreciate that. So, okay, let me ask each of you, what in the world is collaborative team divorce? What is it? How does the process work?
Well, I'll start. A collaborative team divorce is a process to help the divorcing couple address all of their needs, a holistic process to address not just financial needs, but parenting, communication, financial, budgeting, a whole variety of things. So we bring a team of people together to help them not just survive divorce, but help them thrive and move on and get a new beginning by addressing all issues in their life in an out-of-court process.
Yeah. How would you describe it, Chad?
Yeah, I think in its simplest form, it's getting the right professionals to do the right work. So attorneys for legal, financial person for the finances, mental health professional for maybe parenting issues, and really working together. I mean, collaborative divorce, right? It's collaborating together to try to come up with solutions and brainstorm the best options for a couple going through divorce.
What attracted me initially was that it was a systems approach. Families, even couples, are systems, and having something that takes everybody's needs into account and comes up with exactly as you said, Ron, a holistic solution. I think that's what attracted me. So what are the pieces to this? What kinds of professionals work on this?
Well, there are attorneys, mental health professionals, and financial professionals. And so they're kind of trying to deal with all of the legs. As an attorney, so I'm a collaborative attorney, I work with them to be their advocate, but advocate in a whole different way. I mean, I think sometimes people think of advocacy, they think of argument and insult. Well, we don't do that in collaborative. We focus more on trying to meet their interests by helping them identify what they care about at the highest level, and then to help their spouse find a way to say yes to that, and saying yes, not by argument or insult, but by trying to figure out what their goals and needs are. So it really starts to feel more like a problem-solving approach where all the team members try to identify the issues and concerns and goals that the clients have and to try to problem solve so that everybody can win. It doesn't feel like a win-lose scenario.
Chad, you do financial analysis, or you've done a lot of it. How do you work with the mental health professionals on this? And I should explain to listeners, almost all of us in collaborative practice have our mediation training also. But we each have our own job to do in collaborative team practice. Ron and I are lawyers. Chad is a financial analyst. But how do you work with the mental health professionals? Do they seem in the way? Or, do you enjoy having them on the cases that you do?
Yes, it's very different than maybe traditional divorce. You wouldn't think mental health professionals and the financial neutral would communicate during a process. But oftentimes that is the case in a collaborative divorce. And as the financial neutral, it helps me understand the larger dynamics at play with the couple to help me then come up with more creative solutions as we get into problem solving.
One thing that I really appreciate is what a lot of our financial analysts and collaborative practice have done to do scheduling right at the beginning so that everybody knows we usually have an organizational meeting at the beginning for people. And at that time, we like to put all the homework assignments and all the meeting dates on the calendar if we can. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's not possible to do that all at once, but it just helps to make it so smooth. And
I think that's a good point, and there's often a misunderstanding. I think people think because we're out of court, we're going to be a little bit more loose and frivolous, but I think in many ways we're more organized and laid out than I ever saw in the court process. We're very deliberate and intentional about making sure the clients understand where the steps are, and I think managing the process has really been one of the things that brings the clients some relief because they can kind of know what to expect from week to week a bit more.
It's just human nature not to work on things like budgets and data collection unless you've got a deadline, right? We all tend to procrastinate over those kinds of boring things, but sometimes the boring things are the most important. Yeah. And exactly as you say, sometimes I say to folks I'm working with, this is an informal process that's highly structured. And then, typically people go, what in the world is that supposed to mean? Yeah. But we are always making deadlines for ourselves and holding ourselves accountable to one another. So usually at the beginning, we like to set the homework and the meeting dates together. And we've never charged for canceled meetings or time that we don't use. And I think that's a big relief to people, too. Hey, if you can manage to to get to the end faster than we think, then you certainly got our support for that. Maybe you could each speak to the roadmap to resolution and what that is and how we use that in collaborative practice.
Sure, that's one of my favorite parts. I mean, sometimes we talk about that as a sort of the secret sauce of collaborative, because we can kind of create an environment in which people can really focus on their highest needs. And the roadmap to resolution, and it comes from loosely based on the idea of the interest-based bargaining that came out of the Harvard negotiation project many years ago and has been adapted to our process. But really, what it helps people do is rather than getting locked into positions and arguments, to think about their interests and goals first. What are your highest level goals? Things like, I want my children to grow up healthy. I want my children to have a good relationship with both their parents. I want to make sure I can manage my budget, my finances. I want to be less stressed about my economic peers. I want to make sure both households are economically secure. Those kind of goals and interests. So it starts by identifying those things. Before you identify those things, there's no point in moving ahead. And I think divorce can cause people to get too quickly onto positions before they think about what the interests are. So then the roadmap takes you to gathering the facts. Once you've thought about what your interests are, then we need to have all the facts. A lot of times people jump to conclusions like, well, I can't keep the house or she can't keep the house. We don't really know who can keep the house until we have all the facts. And so let's get all the facts together. We've got a very organized process for doing that, and Chad can talk about that. And then once we have all the facts and we understand the goals, then and only then should we sit down and say, what are the choices? What does it make sense to do for the house? What are the different schedules that will work? How can we make support work in a way that works for everybody? And then we that's where the problem solving comes in. Once we have the facts and the goals understood, we can create something that doesn't feel so much like a win-lose. It feels more like a problem solving meeting. And then we get down to the final agreements, and in the end we write up an agreement like any other divorce, but it's really built on those goals and interests and on a solid understanding of the facts.
Yeah.
Chad, I have seen you use that roadmap to resolution so often, every single meeting I think I've ever been in with you. What is it? Tell people what it is and how you use it on the financial work.
Yeah, so the roadmap for me is very helpful. I do present it in every meeting, the very beginning, to center clients on where we are in the process.
What are the steps in the roadmap?
Yep, the process is daunting, so it's helpful. As Ron said, the foundation is the goal setting. And so that's usually the first meeting in the process. Kind of where I really come in is step 2. It's gathering the data. In a divorce process, I've worked in many different processes. Step 1 is really, for me, getting all of the information. And so step 2 of the process is gathering all the information. And then we get into running different options, generating options. And then after options are generated, we can then evaluate the options. And then there's some negotiation to try to get to an option that works overall for the family. And then as Ron said, once that's done, then you guys, the attorneys, can start drafting everything up. But I can't tell you how important it is and how successful it has been to go over that with clients, because they really get lost in where they are in the process. This is another full-time job on top of their job. It's emotional. And so I think the structure of the roadmap is invaluable.
One of my favorite parts of that is watching with them, the relief that they get when they can talk about common goals. Judy, you and I have said it on many meetings where clients come in and they're anxious. They think it's going to be arguments about positions. That we start asking them about what they care about, and they both start talking about their children and even their respect for each other.
Yep.
I think it surprises both of them to hear their spouse talking about some of the same things that they care about, and getting it grounded in the idea that they have more in common than they differ about. Is you can just sense the relief in the room when that happens. Now, doesn't mean there aren't going to be hard decisions, because there will be. But once you know you have that center point of those common goals, everything else seems a little bit easier to tackle.
I think it also is helpful to help the clients understand where they're at, because a lot of times they're in different places. One spouse might be at evaluating, generating options, where the other spouse is just trying to get educated. And so recognizing that in a meeting and saying, okay, you're here, visually showing them that can kind of help them understand where we're at. And hey, we're at step 2 or 3. We're not at step 5 yet, right? We'll get there.
Step 5 on that roadmap is reaching decisions. And it's just so natural for anybody to think, hey, let's just decide and be done. But unless you take the time to collect all the information, in fact, I think collecting the data usually ends up taking the longest time. And nobody should think if it takes them, 45 days to collect all the information we need, including budget building and things like that, that the whole process is going to take, every step is going to take 45 days. So,
and even that, as long as it takes, is, I think, done so much more efficiently than the old ways that we used to do things, where lawyers would send big heaps of discovery back. I would gather a whole bunch of things, and Judy'd gather a whole bunch of things. We'd spend months comparing what I gathered versus what Judy gathered, and blah, blah, blah. Now we turn it over to someone like Chad, and who's an expert at gathering information, who does it so much more efficiently, so that by the time we sit down, we have a much more thorough understanding of the facts than I ever did in litigation for about a fraction of the time.
Yeah, and I think it works efficiently. What's different, my experience in other processes, is that, as you said, clients provide their information to their attorneys. Then their attorneys may provide it to a neutral person, a mediator, if that's who they're working with. In the collaborative process, we do things a little bit differently, where all of the data is funneled directly through the neutral, and then we disperse it to each side. Everyone has the data. And I find that it's disarming for clients. They're sending it to a neutral person versus to their own attorneys and then to the mediator. It's more efficient as well. You're skipping a step.
both of you have worked with clients in the court-based system too. And as Ron mentioned, he and I have had cases before we started doing collaborative practice. We had cases in the conventional court litigation world too. But what's the difference, do you think, for your clients first and then for you? What's the difference in terms of the experience for people who are in the litigation model as opposed to the collaborative team model?
Well, I think one of the core principal pieces, and if you said legally the biggest difference, is we sign an agreement at the very beginning of the process that none of the professionals involved in the case are going to go to court. So in the unlikely event that it turned into a adversarial process, they would have to start over with a different team. Now that's the unnerving part of it to people, for most people, but in reality it happens a very small percentage of the time. And I think what people don't realize is that by disqualifying the part of court, we reduce some of the fear that can be in the room, because a court-based settlement in the shadow of the courthouse can be a fear-based settlement. The idea that one lawyer is going to say, well, do this, or the judge is going to make you do it. And then the other attorney starts saying, well, no, the judge is going to make you do this. And as soon as that kind of dialogue enters the room, there's a whole different feeling. You know, interest-based bargaining goes out the window, and it's positioned in fear-based bargaining. So the idea of operating outside the shadow of the courthouse is there to give us more freedom. And I like to say, our clients know, and we're sitting at a table together, there's no circumstance in which they'll ever find me arguing against or saying bad things about them. And that builds a little bit more trust. If they thought there was even a little bit of chance that I might be in a room arguing them, they would be much more guarded in what they say. And I find that clients are much more candid, much more comfortable knowing they're working with a team of professionals who aren't going to go to court, so that they know that they can be involved in more candid conversations about what's happening in their family.
Yeah, for me, I would say that I see clients just being their best selves. You don't, maybe in the beginning that fear element is there, kind of, when that fear element is blocking things, it's hard to be your best and think from your frontal cortex, right? But we do everything we can to be able to deal with that so that we actually are seeing people at their strongest and their best. And that, for me, is a huge difference.
That's such a good point, Judy. I think helping people bring their better selves to the table is one of the probably the best description of what lawyers try to do, or all the team tries to do as any. And it's hard to imagine because people always think of divorce causing people to be in their worst selves, and a lot of times before they come into our office, they have seen the worst of each other. They think they're really afraid, and the idea of helping them bring their better selves to the table is one of the great challenges, but I think can make such an enormous difference. And I see more effort to do that by the whole team than I ever saw in traditional practice. I think a lot of times in traditional, we would say, oh, there's no way they're ever going to speak respectfully to each other. And we would watch meetings in which you couldn't believe these two people ever got married. Now I see meetings, and you and I have been in a lot of those, where I almost moved to tears watching the level of respect someone can show, even though they clearly want a divorce, the respect they have about for the other person once you can let them bring that self. Because there's a part that married each other. Much as they might be angry with each other, there's a part of them that really cares about that other person. If we can bring that to the table, the problems become so much easier to solve.
Yep. What have you seen, Chad, in the differences for the folks you work with?
Yeah, I think there's really three differences that really stick out to me. One is being in the same room together most of the time is huge. Clients are seeing budgets being developed, balance sheet being developed. The discussions are all happening the majority of the time as a group. So there's less of that fear or what are they thinking, what are they talking about. We're doing it all together. I think that is one of the most powerful things in the collaborative process that I notice. Another one is interest-based, focusing on people's interests more than anything. In traditional, it's more of how do we bolster our side. So you end up kind of each with what they want. And as a financial neutral in the collaborative process, it's really focusing and me learning, what really is most important to each spouse. And then as we get into generating options, focusing on those interests. So focusing more from a place of the center. It can look different for different couples versus starting kind of far apart and then ultimately ending up in the middle. And I think focusing on interests really can create options where both clients can feel like their priorities are met, which I don't necessarily always see in traditional process. So those are probably the two biggest that I see.
So this work that we do is sometimes really intense, but we all have families and lives outside of this. Tell me a little bit more about like your family life. Like you've got two little ones, Chad.
Yeah, so I have a
How old are they now?
9-year-old, 3-year-old, just turned 3 this week. And I would say it's a challenge. Being a financial advisor, when I got into this career, I wasn't thinking, I want to get into divorce work. I don't think any financial advisor really has ever said that. For me, I kind of fell into it, meaning my office kind of did some of the work. I was in an office space with family attorneys and kind of dipped my toe in, and the toe dipping turned into jumping into the deep end, right? And so I kind of learned on the fly, I guess. And it was a struggle, trying to separate work from home. I think still a struggle to this day, but you learn to deal with it. But it's also been informative for me, dealing with clients going through this, dealing with the different professionals that I deal with to kind of even try to help with my own family.
And your practice has evolved, too, over this time because you're doing more and more also wealth management for people.
Right. Yep. So I've primarily over the last 17 years worked as a financial neutral, primarily in the collaborative process. Also do wealth management, working with clients on their long-term goals. And then recently also started doing more what we call non-neutral work or working with one person. So oftentimes there's a disparity in education level around clients. One spouse managed the finances, the other one maybe didn't manage it at all. It's really helping the client that needs the education get educated through the process so that they can come to the table in negotiations and be more prepared and feel like they at least understand the foundational information that's being discussed.
And Ron, tell us a little bit about your family too, because you are in a long-term marriage yourself with kids and grandkids. How many do you have now?
Well, I'll be 7 in 2 months. I just had my sixth grandchild a month ago, and then another grandson is going to be born in 2 months. So I'm in the sweet spot of life where you can just enjoy all of that, and so it's just as exciting as anything can be. And I love family relationships. It's one of the things that drew me into working with families, because relationships are interesting to me and fascinating. And I know people say, well, gee, why would you want to work in relationships that have been damaged? Well, because I think all relationships matter, and even those that have been damaged can grow and be productive. And I like the challenge of being able to help people find the parts of the relationship that they can still celebrate even when they're having to live in two homes. And so that's the part that's always been more interesting to me. Relationships are more interesting than some other aspects of law. And I think one of the things that I like best about collaborative is that it allows us to focus on the intangibles, not just the tangibles. We'll take care of the tangibles, the dollars, and who gets the house, and who's going to be at mom's house on Wednesday. But the intangibles, how do you relate to each other? How do you care about each other? In the end of the day, 10 years later, when we talk to clients, those are the things that they talk about the most, the respect they showed. And I think collaborative is a process that allows us to focus on those intangible things, which are really the more interesting and challenging parts, and the parts that I think draw me to my work, and also parallels the kind of life I lead at home.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, telling us about what you do. And I got a chance to introduce you, listeners, to two people who are two of my most favorite people on the planet. So thank you so much for tuning in, and hope this was helpful to you, and blessings on you and your day.